Hi everyone, thanks for joining me today for this week's video where I'm going to tell you the things that really matter when it comes to creating good photos. I'm going to give you some examples and some actionable steps that will help you improve your photography. And most importantly of all of these tips are there to reinforce the point that great photos can be taken without spending a fortune. Now, I firmly believe that good gear doesn't necessarily lead to good photos, and instead we should be putting far more emphasis on good ideas. As Ansel Adams once said in a really poignant quote, which I still think about on a regular basis, and that is that there's nothing worse than a sharp photo of a fuzzy concept. It's a really good one to remember. Good ideas, carefully considered compositions, exercising some creative thinking, and just generally thinking outside of the box. These are all things that are going to lead to much more captivating and thought-provoking images. I've got an example to show you here of a collection of photos that I took a few years ago on Newborough Beach in Anglesey, and they were shot using ICM, or intentional camera movement. It's a concept that involves moving the camera intentionally during the exposure to create a very abstract effect. Arguably, these images could be shot on any camera with any lens, as things like sharpness, optical performance, and accurate color recreation don't significantly impact the final image. And whilst I'm not for a second saying that these are great images, I think they help illustrate the point. Even now, I think 3 years later, I still look back at these images with real fondness because they stand out amongst the other images that I've taken. I have a fondness for it because Newborough Beach is a place that has significance for me. It's somewhere that I return to quite often. And these images have been shown at an exhibition, and it just goes to show that it's just about the idea. It's just about stepping outside of your comfort zone, of the things that you are typically drawn to, and just experimenting. And often good things will come as a result of that. I wasn't thinking about the gear, and the gear really wasn't important. And I mentioned Newborough Beach and Anglesey and a location that has significance to me because that brings me on to my next point, and that is the importance of location. So I just wanted to briefly interrupt the video here by saying, firstly, if you are finding the ideas in this video helpful, then do consider hitting the subscribe button. But more importantly than that, I also wanted to let you know that my brand new podcast, the Caffeinated Camera Club, is now available to stream and download on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. This podcast is all about sharing more ideas from myself and also the wider photographic and creative community. The podcast is going to be very conversational. It's often going to be recorded in the field so I can bring you out with me on photo shoots. We're going to have interviews and conversations with other photographers and creative people. And I want to put a spotlight on the community because there's no point in listening to me ramble on. I want to hear some of your ideas as well, because as creatives, as photographers, we all have great ideas and we all think about creativity and our photography all the time. And I think it's really valuable to share those voices amongst the community and with a wider audience. So the podcast is going to be released every couple of weeks. The best thing to do is to head over to your podcast player of choice, hit follow, and then you'll be notified when new episodes of the show get released. I'm super excited about this. Thank you to everybody who has already listened. I did put a newsletter out a few days ago announcing it. So if you aren't subscribed to the newsletter yet, do consider doing that as well. Link in the description. Therefore, you won't miss out on future announcements. But yeah, thank you to everybody who has shown support. And yeah, if you do get a chance to listen to it, if you want to lend me your ears and check it out, I would love to know your thoughts. Anyway, back to the video. Now, location is given a slightly unfair emphasis in photography, especially when we look at these really exotic locations. Think of like the dramatic landscapes of Iceland or the Faroe Islands, the Canadian Rockies, or, you know, maybe the streets of New York or London. I mean, I would love to photograph in all of these places. Of course, I'd love to go and visit them. But it's counterproductive to let those places be the benchmark of where good photos happen. The expense, the investment in time, the accessibility of some of these locations are quite unattainable for many photographers. Now, in terms of my own photography, some of my favourite photos that I've taken have come very locally to where I live, in places that don't cost a lot of money to get to and don't require a whole lot of effort. Now, I don't want to create the illusion that I live somewhere particularly interesting. I live in a fairly typical North Wales village in the countryside. It's very rural, definitely not as dramatic as, some of the landscapes that you find in this country, but I do like to try and approach my photography with a level of objectivity. I think the trouble is that we all become familiar with our surroundings, and familiarity can be both a blessing and a curse. I think the curse of it is that we spend so much time, in our local area. We know it so well. We know what's around every corner. We've seen the interesting photography subjects, so many times that they inevitably start to feel maybe a little bit monotonous. But it can also be your superpower as a photographer, because that familiarity, that very intimate knowledge of your surroundings, knowing the locations very well, knowing your subjects very well, that can really lead to great photos. And I think the trick is to try and put yourself in the mindset of the viewer, because the people who view your photos will have never seen these locations before, especially if you live somewhere very obscure. That can actually work in your favour. Now, back in May, we went down to Kent on holiday and stayed around Dungeness and Rye, somewhere completely new to me. And we were walking around Rye one day and we stumbled across a gallery exhibition for a local photographer called Terry Hulf. And for me, if I ever see an exhibition or a gallery, I'm always going to go in and have a look because I find them really inspiring. And I'm so glad I took the time to visit this one, because these were all photos that were shot within a few miles of where Terry lived. They were quieter images focusing on the details of the landscape, the farms, the back roads, the communities, and the images resonated with me so much. I ended up buying the book, and I revisit this book all the time. I think it's because I could see my local area reflected in these photos. Where I live is also very agricultural, and I guarantee the photos of your local area will be relatable to someone else, even if they live in a completely different part of the country. I think we're often drawn to things that feel familiar to us. It's why when I look at a photo of a landscape in Iceland, for example, sure, I think to myself, wow, what a dramatic landscape, but really my thoughts kind of end there. And it's because I don't really have anything that connects me to these landscapes and to these locations. Whereas when I look at Terry's images, I can almost put myself inside of that photo. I know what that type of landscape looks like. I know what it smells like in the summer. I know what the air feels like on a winter's morning at sunrise, because my grandfather owned a farm and I spent many happy years in my childhood exploring these types of landscapes. Those are often the things that stop me in my tracks when I look at photos, and they're the types of photos that I will pause and reflect on. Another thing to keep in mind when shooting locally is that the accessibility of your local area gives you an advantage as a photographer. It's important to remember that the endless accessibility of your local area means that you're able to easily revisit scenes, subjects, and locations that you want to photograph. You can see them in different seasons, during different times of day, during different types of weather. It gives you endless rolls of the dice to get the perfect photo. Also, photographing locations and subjects that are close to home are going to create more photos that actually mean something to you. These types of photos, these locations, are going to garner up some kind of feeling when you look back at them in the future. There's going to be nostalgia and there's going to be memories built into these images. And if you ask me, that's pretty priceless. Now, it doesn't cost anything to set your alarm a little bit earlier to head out to chase that golden hour light of sunrise, or to put on a raincoat to go out and shoot the rain, or to swap an evening sat on the sofa watching Netflix for an evening in the outdoors photographing the sunset. The only thing it really costs us is time, and perhaps a little bit of comfort. But these conditions, when it comes to things like time of day and light, weather, the seasonality of the time of year that you're photographing. These are all going to be the things that make the biggest impact to the final image. Doesn't matter what you shoot with, it doesn't matter what camera you have, it doesn't matter what lens you have. Those elements are going to make or break a photo. So it's important to be out and be in it to win it. You have to be outdoors. You have to push yourself into the discomfort of standing around in the rain or waking up a few hours earlier and sacrificing sleep to, get the good light, especially during the summer. It's much easier in the winter, but then it's cold, so it's a struggle for an entirely different reason. But those are always going to be the things that lead to good photos. And let me tell you, if you actually push through and persevere and you get the great conditions and you get a great photo as a result of that, I promise you that getting that good photo will make all of the hardship and all of the struggle totally worthwhile. Now, the problem with photography on YouTube is that we are constantly being influenced when it comes to buying gear and upgrading our equipment. And whilst these videos are maybe well-intentioned and certainly serve a purpose if you are in a position where you need to upgrade, I think it can create a false sense of urgency amongst photographers that they need to kind of keep up with whatever the latest and greatest camera body or lens is from insert camera manufacturer here. It doesn't help when the gulf in price between cameras and lenses are getting wider and wider. Deciding what you need to spend money on and what equipment you need to buy is tricky sometimes. If we look at lenses, for example, you can get a 50mm prime lens for about £100, £150, but you can also get a 50mm prime lens for £1,500, depending on the aperture and the optics. But as I said at the start of this video, getting a better lens isn't necessarily going to guarantee that you get better photos, and therefore I think it's far more important to really learn and master the gear that you have and the gear that you can afford. This lens that I'm filming on now is the Lumix 50mm f1.8. You can get this lens on MPB for probably around £150. Not sponsored, by the way. Prime lenses are always sharper than zoom lenses. It's a bit of a generalization, but it is often true. Even this more affordable prime lens creates really stunning and really detailed images. I've shot a ton of stuff on this lens and I've always been really happy with the results. Would I be happier with a 1.2 aperture prime lens? Probably not. It definitely doesn't make me want to spend the best part of an extra £1,000 to have slightly more light gathering within the lens, especially because I shoot everything normally between like f5.6 and f11 because I shoot landscapes. So do I really need a fast aperture? Probably not. And I'm not saying that you have to buy a 50mm lens. I'm just using 50mm as an example because these lenses are fairly ubiquitous and are normally the most affordable. But you can choose any focal length that you want when it comes to prime lenses. Pick something that is more suited to the field of view that you enjoy in your photos, but don't fall into the trap that a limited focal length and a limited budget are somehow a disadvantage. The restricted field of view offered by prime lenses, coupled with their optical superiority, will teach you so much about composition and photography in general. You'll have to really think about the compositions that you choose because you will have to explore different perspectives and ways of photographing certain scenes. But over time, because you'll be so used to shooting at certain focal lengths, your eye will become tuned into that, and then you'll be able to easily pre-visualize images without even having your camera in your hand. You'll be able to look at a scene and just know whether that works for the types of camera lenses or focal lengths that you have. Also, if we look back at all the really poignant and important photos of the 20th century, photos that even today still stand up as being true examples of great photography, many of those photos will have been shot on prime lenses. You'll see entire projects, entire photo books, all shot on the same focal length. Think 28mm for some really iconic street photography. Maybe some landscape work would have been shot on a 24mm prime or a 35mm prime. Quite often it was just one body and one lens, and that's all you needed to create great work. And that hasn't changed. That, I believe, is still true today. So don't go thinking that you need to buy zoom lenses, that you need to cover the entire focal spectrum from ultra wide to super telephoto. You don't need to fill your camera bag. You just need to think about what you like in terms of like what types of images do you shoot, what kind of field of view or focal length do you enjoy shooting with, and what do you have available to you? What can you afford? It's far better to just focus on that and really just become a master of it. It will help you create your own style in the end. So I'll leave it there for today. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you found this video helpful. I hope there was some useful perspective shared in this video. If you did enjoy it, make sure to give the video a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. To everybody who has listened to the Caffeinated Camera Club podcast already, I thank you so much for taking the time to do that. And for anybody who hasn't checked it out yet, I would be really grateful if you could do that and just let me know what you think. So until next week, take care. See you all soon.